Welcome everybody to day number 2 of the FEBA Annual Convention 2021. It's a pleasure to moderate this second day. My name is Laura Gavinelli, and let me give you a very quick wrap-up about the first day, yesterday. It was a great morning because we had the chance to introduce through 3 top-level panels the situations, the scenario, but also the challenges that food bankers, but also partners have to face in order to overcome this pandemic period and especially to boost a more sustainable food system. What did we do today? We worked very hard during our working tables, reasoning with diverse participants coming from NGOs, organizations, food banks, but also institutional bodies and companies, of course, on how to boost, to improve the situation, to boost a sustainable food system. And that's why we organized the discussions in 6 working tables. After our creative workshops, which helped us to develop a divergent, creative way of thinking and finding out solutions, we concentrate our discussion in these 6 tables. Let me say the main topics of the tables, which are data collection and digital transformation, the first one. The second table dedicated to corporate partnerships. The third one dedicated to rethinking the food banking narrative. The fourth one, the role of young generations and food banks. While the fifth was discussing the role of volunteering, and the sixth table was concentrated on new boundaries for food redistribution. That's the time to wrap up what came out from the discussion, and I very quickly opened the floor to Fabio Fraticelli, who facilitated the discussion of the first working table. You're welcome, Fabio.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to say you once again, ciao. Really happy to take part to this work together. Our working table was about data and digital transformation, which means that basically we try to start from the experience that we have done so far through the online observatory that was started in 2020 by FEBA, which is basically the first and unique digital touch point, where most of the knowledge about food banks activities is condensed. So we try to build, starting from that experience, and to ask to food banks and working together with partner and external guests about what is the future of data and digital transformation, and how do they see the development of digital inside within the food banks. Insights were really interesting. I want to thank you personally, one by one, people who contributed to developing this common thought. First, we asked what are currently the main challenges in collecting and using data within food banks. There are several challenges that came out. For sure, there is an aspect is related to resistance to change, the need for introducing a new way of thinking, let's say, which is starting to being stronger and stronger within food banks, but that we have to strengthen. Another challenge is understanding which type of data do we need. Do we need a lot of data, or do we need only a few relevant KPIs? It's an open question that we are trying to address all together. Another challenge is about the capability of involving charities in the data collection process. So there are several types of challenges. Some are technical, let's say, some are related to competencies and culture, some other are related to multi-stakeholder perspective that must be involved into the process, the data collection process. At the same time, food banks are absolutely have a super clear idea about how data will be used in the future to foster their activities. Particularly, they are focused on data that can engage more and more donors and that can engage more in general stakeholders. But also, they see data as a powerful opportunity to make decisions that are more clear and more rational, so to make better decisions at the end. I was really impressed by the clarity and the clear understanding about investments, because participants to Working Table 2 highlighted several types of investments. The first type of investment that is needed is about, of course, technologies, softwares and hardware needed to collect and share and shape data in order to publicly share meaningful information. But they are aware also about the importance of investing in competencies. I was really interested by one proposal of building up a community of, let's say, IT experts, IT referrals that can somehow work together to let all the food banks to improve their own capability of developing their own digital transformation pathways. In this journey, FEBA is considered like a pivotal actor. There was a unique understanding of how important is the first step that was made in 2020 through the online observatory, so which is considered like a cornerstone in the process of developing a common platform for data collection and sharing. So the food banks see a very large space for more and more integration at several levels all over the Europe. So if you want to summarize our table, I see a lot of focus, energy, desire to work together and invest together in order to make a better infrastructure that can let food banks to collect and share and take out meaningful information from data. Thank you once again. I think this is everything from our table.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Of course, all the discussion were far denser, but thank you very much for your capacity of wrapping up the main points. And that's the time to wrap up the second working table, which was about corporate partnerships. And now we can have a glimpse on that. It was facilitated by me, so I keep on talking directly on the working table. In that case, we had the chance, and I thank very much the participants for granting a double perspective, because we had the chance to have inside the group the discussion, both the representatives of companies, so the private sector, and of food bankers. So it was like having the two faces of the same coin. And we started associating nouns, adjectives, and verbs to the word partnership. And in the word cloud, you can have a very direct glimpse on what it matters when collaborating. And this is a very first demonstration that it is not only a matter of gaining and distributing food or donations. It's far beyond this. This is the basis, but it's useful and it's necessary to share also vision about the future, dreams, but also to respect the role of each other in a mutual way and collaborating for the common benefit. On the right side of the slide, we can see how we organize the perspectives from the food banks and the companies in terms of what they give to the partnerships and what they gain from it. In yellow color, you can find the perspective of companies, while in green one, you can see the view of food banks. In the first case, you can see that they get, for sure, professionalism and also customized services depending on the specific situations of the company. Food banks are available, very quick, very professional, but also very flexible to customize their service, their support in order to coordinate in the best way the food redistribution. On the other side, what is mostly important, apart from gaining food and donation, is a trust matter, and also the way of keeping continuity, so keeping relations over time, long-lasting relationships. We can switch to the second one, please. We can see the second slide, please. Yes, as for what hinders, so the obstacles to these long-lasting relationships, we can see the yellow once again, the companies, the green for the food banks, while the light blue is something which was shared by both sides. As for companies, sometimes it's difficult to match business pressure and priority to the values and also the goals of the food banks. On the other side, food banks suffer from different perspectives and different goals and visions on what is the common benefit, the common good to share with people in need. In terms of common points, they all agree on the necessity to let's say so, to overcome some obstacles created by different goals and different visions. And as for the very last part of the discussion, the third slide, please. We reasoned on the consequences of COVID pandemic. For sure, it is still an accelerator of corporate partnerships, of collaborations. But the point is how to keep these relationships over time after for a period which will be post-COVID. So these are the areas on which we might invest on. So trust, long-lasting skills, long-lasting relations, no matter the size of the partners, private company partners and food bank partner, invest on the skills, and engaging also more volunteers coming from the company, which is a way of sharing expertise and also know each other in a better way. And another very important point was from the participants, the point related to legal agreement. So diversify legal agreements depending on the conditions of the cooperation and depending on the typology and also the maturity of the corporate partnership. And so many points also for this working table. But I open the floor to the third working table, which was about rethinking the food banking network in terms of communications. And the facilitator in this case was Vivienne Lolor. The floor is yours. Thank you, Vivienne.
Thank you, Laura. So thank you. I was just delighted to host this working table on the theme of rethinking the food banking narrative. And also I would specifically like to thank my participants, a group mixed with food bankers and from external participants. There was a great engagement and great insight. And I think we got, albeit in a short amount of time, I think we got to a really interesting place. And I think it's opened up a very interesting discussion that we'd like to continue. So just to give a little bit of background to this workshop, I think, COVID has put a spotlight on the work of food banks and food redistribution organizations in supporting communities over the last 12 months. And we've been seen as frontline heroes of the pandemic. We have images all over the world from warehouses highlighting our passion and our commitment to support communities. But we wanted to understand what has been the impact of COVID on the food banking narrative. How are we seen? How are we positioned in the minds and hearts of our stakeholders, whether that be partners, funders, volunteers, supporters, and our own teams? There's been an awareness driven around the problem and the problems of food waste and food insecurity, but have we driven an awareness of who we are and what we do? And I suppose, does the narrative in the media in general, does that reflect the organizations who we are? Does it tell the story of ambition, passion, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the impact that we are having on people and the planet. So the role of this workshop was to kickstart a discussion whether there's a need for a refreshed narrative, a refreshed positioning for food banking to unlock growth into the future, and also to develop recommendations for FEBA to support members in terms of how we communicate with our partners. So on the left, we took, with the groups broke into breakout groups, 3 groups, and we looked very specifically at how do we think we are seen now? And I think really interestingly, some of the answers that came was, we are there for food package provision. We're seen as the volunteers that stand at the supermarket door. Our role is in feeding the poor. We're not necessarily always seen as modern. We're seen as a charity. We offer food waste for free. Sometimes we're just seen as the warehouse, the bricks and mortar of what we do. And there was also the criticism that we're a sticking plaster for the government, that we are here as a result of failure of government. So we parked the position that sometimes can be reflected on how we see now. And we decided to spend a little bit more time on how we would like to be seen into the future. And so there's a powerful shift that was recommended from moving from a charity that can often be inspired by ideals, but not necessarily have that level of professionalism that we offer, from shifting from charity to NGO. I think something that came out really interestingly from an external partner was the power that we have at a local level and the power that we have at a national and a global level is probably not as fully understood as it could be. And it's very powerful for us in what we do. We have such a unique position that we are so close to the needs of communities. And I think one comment that came out was that, we need to differentiate ourselves from the charities we support. And I think there is a multifaceted organization behind that volunteer at the door. And we are an essential cog in the food supply chain. And yet maybe none of these messages are making it to where they need to go. And I think in the green box, just one line that was very, very powerful from the team: we are not the producer, we are not the user, but we are the dotted line that connects the needs. And that connection of needs, I think, is something really powerful and something that we can communicate. And to finish, I think just the role of FEBA, I think one of the key things was, can we continue this working group? I think we could talk for a lot longer. Within the group, we had 2 short case studies for the network. So maybe more case studies, external and internal case studies, looking at an opportunity for us to look at branding to help FEBA reposition in the hearts and minds of our stakeholders. And looking to maybe use a shared language is important as well, which was what was seen from a case study from Italy. So I think to summarize, there is a new role for food banks as a very important cog in food systems that can work towards a more sustainable future. But we do need to build that understanding. It's a very complex environment, and we need to build awareness. And awareness is something that we really need to work on now, not just of the problem, but of our role within it. The lack of understanding, I suppose, complexity is the enemy, and the lack of understanding can be damaging, and it may be inhibiting to future growth. So we need to work to reframe the narrative, to improve understanding and build broad-based interest and support. And just one line from one external facilitator was, the time is right to reframe and reshape our position, and it's time to go. So that's a summary from Rethinking the Food Banking Narrative. And thank you, Laura, for the opportunity.
Thanks to you for the clarity, and also your table provided very, very interesting insights, food for thought, as we saw also during our creative workshop at the really beginning of the morning. So that's the time for having some update from the working table number 4, dedicated to young generations. In this case, I welcome Sophie Kamrad. You're welcome.
Thanks a lot. So we were 26 participants from all over Europe, from France, many from Italy, Spain, Poland, Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, and the UK. And all of the participants had very different backgrounds. So some came from academic research and institutions, some worked in food banks in their countries, and others were from corporations and companies. And during the first part of the discussion, we talked about how young people can contribute to a sustainable food system in innovative ways, and what food banks can do to involve and communicate with young people. Well, first of all, young people have a new mindset and attitude. They are increasingly aware of and care about issues such as sustainability because they eventually directly affect our future. A second key point was education. Educating young people about food and sustainability from an early age is key, and involving them also from an early age. We have observed that, for example, now it's often the kids that teach parents new behaviors. And another buzzword for how to involve young people in food bank activities was empowerment and participation. They want to be engaged and be a part of the process and the organization. And we thought of hybrid ways of involving them, for example, through combining volunteering, training, and workshops, which could be a key factor for food banks. And another interesting thought that was brought up on how to engage young people was through gamification. This could be, for example, school or university contests and projects, or hackathons, because many young people show an entrepreneurial approach and mindset. And then we went on and talked about what added value young people can bring to the food banks and how we imagine the future of food banks. So, for example, digital skills and the appreciation for more horizontal and less hierarchical ways of working will be a great asset. And also establishing and strengthening partnerships with cooperation. We had a really great example from Italy, where the food bank hosted an event with the company and taught them about food bank related topics and engaged young professionals who also took part in the working table today. It was also mentioned that in the future, it will be crucial to empower and engage the beneficiaries of food banks more, to address root causes and follow a holistic approach, so that food banks become more of a community hub and less just through giving out food. Also, being eco-friendly and climate-friendly, not only due to saving food, but also looking at the means of transportation and packaging could be really interesting. I think all in all, we had a very interesting and fruitful discussion and some new insights because of the different background, and it really was a pleasure. And one key message that we wanted to share is that young people are the leaders of change, and through food banks involvement, we can really be protagonists of the future of our countries, of Europe, and potentially the world. So thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to participate. And
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you for the meaningful insights you provide us from your working table. And now we pass to table number 5, which was about volunteering, and the updates is provided both from Gabriela Civico and Sara. You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity today to have this exchange within the context of the FEBA conference. My name is Gabriela. I'm the director at the Center for European Volunteering. You can see here from the slide that we focused really on 4 topics, always through the aspect of volunteering in relation to the food banks. We looked at the importance of the cross-sectoral partnerships at the local level. We have a competition called the European Volunteering Capital, and there we put a lot of emphasis on the importance of the way that public authorities, NGOs, charities, the not-for-profit sector in general, and for-profit companies can work together. So we talked there about how this has had an impact on volunteering within the food banks, what the partnerships between the different entities look like, and how important is the volunteering strategy of the local municipalities when we talk about capitalizing and making the most out of all the volunteers that contribute to the food banks. We noticed particularly that there are big differences between the ways that public authorities support volunteering in food banks, the amount of visibility that they give to that, the amount of appreciation that they give to their volunteers in their local municipalities. And we also noted that there are big differences between cities and rural areas, between how many volunteers are available and what is the profile of those volunteers. Keeping within the theme of the partnerships, we also looked at the specific model of volunteering called employee volunteering or corporate volunteering, whether this is a solution to the changing profiles of volunteers, which we have seen particularly through the pandemic. We have seen older volunteers having to pull back. We have seen younger volunteers stepping in, as we heard from the last speaker. Now we see younger volunteers having less time because they go back to studies, they go back to work. So how can we fill this gap in the volunteering? Maybe employee volunteering, corporate volunteering is a solution. We notice the different situations for countries and regions where there are more SMEs or where there are more multinationals in terms of how this kind of corporate volunteering could contribute. We also noticed about the kind of corporate volunteering which can give occasional help to food banks, and also the kind of corporate volunteering that can give more regular help in terms of time, in terms of energy, but also in terms of skills, and maybe more strategically helping food banks with how they develop and work. We emphasized, of course, the need to look at and address and not to shy away from the importance of the balance between the volunteers and the paid staff in food banks and how that can change. We noticed that there are quite big differences between food banks that are fully reliant on volunteers and those food banks that have some paid staff and some volunteers. We spoke about the European Union funding program, the European Solidarity Corps, which enables young people usually to travel to another country, but also within their own country, to volunteer full-time for periods between a couple of months and up to 12 months. And we discussed whether that could be a solution for those food banks who are really struggling to have permanent human resources available, and maybe these volunteers could be a solution for that. We spoke, of course, about potential language barriers that could be involved with young people coming from another country, but we also thought that there could be solutions and ways that this could be overcome. These were the issues that we looked at concerning how food banks are relying on volunteers, how volunteers want to engage with food banks. They see that as an important cause in general, and how we can better match the offer that comes from people across Europe to volunteering food banks, what food banks really need, and how food banks can organize their volunteering and support their volunteers in the proper way. Thank you for the opportunity to facilitate this, also with Sarah, who is working on the relations with the members and with the corporate bodies that we work with. So if you have any questions or need further information, we're available for you.
Thank you, Gabriele, and thank you also to Sara Fazzoli, as you reminded. And now we switch to the last working table, which was about how to rebuild the food redistribution. The facilitator in this case was Emma Walsh. Emma, you're welcome.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to FEBA for having me. And I'd also like to thank my working group, who were really full of great ideas and a really interesting dialogue. So our working table was on new boundaries in food redistribution, which is obviously a very broad and rich topic. And we started by reflecting on trends in the food system. And this is really informed by yesterday's discussion and the, I suppose, presentations that we had from such a wide variety of guest speakers. And we talked about how these would impact on, I suppose, food redistribution for the future. We reviewed the impact of COVID, because obviously this has had a huge impact for food banks, and there's been so many changes in terms of where food waste is arising, the sources of surplus food for the food banks, and the changes that we've had to adopt and the learnings that we've had from this. We agreed that the food system is changing, and we have a pivotal role to play as food banks in contributing to a more sustainable food future. But I suppose we feel that this isn't recognised, and the environment that we have operated for quite some time is undergoing an awful lot of change. So first, we started to list some of the challenges that we face as food banks. We discussed, the challenges we face in terms of redistribution of food, because there's lots of challenges, but it's specific to redistribution of food. So we discussed how it can be difficult to connect with a network of donors and to get widespread engagement. We discussed the challenges of changing sources of food, and lots of businesses now have lean processes and they're working in optimization. So where we might have had a lot of food previously, these sources are reducing. We discussed challenges in managing the nutritional balance of food and having diverse sources of food. And we discussed, I suppose, the capacity challenges around managing fresh and perishable products. We discussed that while technology solutions are great, that it was difficult to get wide adoption of technology and logistics platforms. When we also acknowledged that even though we're doing great work around digital transformation and the work on the digital, the kind of pilot project on data collection, we need a lot of resources and capacity building for innovation technology within our networks. We also discussed the challenges of connecting to, I suppose, those at risk of social isolation, and what we refer to, I suppose, as the new poor, and the challenges and stigma associated with accessing food. And we also discussed, the need to connect with producers, I suppose, availability of food at a farm level, but the lack of economic incentive to bring producers on board, and even I suppose, the incentives that are there in terms of sending food to animal feed or anaerobic digestion. So then I suppose we move to the ideas that we have for increasing redistribution and being part of a more sustainable food future and food system. One of our ideas was around positioning food banks in a new light to business and government, that we're innovative partners in solving huge challenge of food waste. And connectors and integrators, and we think this role is really important, the role we play in connecting and integrating, and this relates to a lot of the topics from the other groups. So we are the nerve center, we are the hub, we know where the charities who need the food are, and we know where the food is arising, and we make all of the different pieces of the puzzle come together to get this food to where it's needed. We also talked about the kind of idea of new technological models in connecting with those in need, and potentially how that could reduce stigma. We also talked about the work that we could do with startups in terms of new technologies that we can adopt as a network. And I guess also, in developing our own redistribution model. And we are a big network. We are FEBA. We have a lot of credibility and experience. But these startups then can work with us to help us developing new models, whether that's technology, extending the life of products, providing new ways of accessing food. So then I guess to summarize, we had, I suppose, 3 recommendations for FEBA. We talked about the need for the continued work in policy and advocacy with the EU and international institutions on, I suppose, firming up the role of food banks, really underlining our importance in the food system, and especially in emphasizing the role that we have played during the crisis. But then also we need to have a stronger voice around the incentivization of our work at a producer and farm level, and to look at how we can make it fair for farmers to donate food, because we recognise from the presentations yesterday as well that the farmers are often left behind. That it's not fair to expect farmers to donate food where they've lost out on sales. And how can we make this, I suppose, work better in terms of the recovery food, so that we're able to provide more food to those in need, but also to support our farmers, our producers and our growers, and make sure that food isn't wasted. We also talked about the need to work collectively to engage with businesses and develop partnerships. So FEBA, again, it's an umbrella group, and that it can open the doors in a way that maybe individual food banks in member states can't. So I suppose an approach of kind of setting up dialogues between members and donors, it would be really helpful. And we did a little bit of this last year. We had some good meetings where members were able to ask questions to some of our food donors to kind of engage with them. But we would like to do more of this, and we found this really beneficial. And then our third and final recommendation was that looking at potentially a FEBA group on innovation to support connections to startup but also the resources and capacity building that we need to adopt new models of redistribution and adopting kind of new innovations for the future. So that was all from Working Group 6. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you, Emma, also to you for your wrap-up. And I think these all 6 tables were really rich and precious in terms of inputs and also in guidelines somehow for FEBA, reasoning on how to boost a more sustainable food system and rethinking somehow the role of food banks inside different dynamics, local and global ones. By the way, let me remind, let me give you, the participants, technical information. All the materials included what we showed right now about the working tables will be uploaded on the dedicated website, which is annualconvention.eurofoodbank.org in the next days. So you won't miss anything of what you are looking at right now and hearing also in terms of video registration. If you look on the right side of your screen, you might be able to see also that Marielle Binken is working for us with her wonderful capacity of concentrating and data visualizing what we are saying and sharing right now. She started yesterday and she's keeping on also today. And so this was a very simple information, but I think it was important just to remind. And a second one is more an invitation. Please write your comments and also your questions. You have 2 possibilities to do that. You can put your questions inside the box of a Facebook page. On the other hand, you can also write us directly an email to annualconvention@eurofoodbank.org. Please do that because that's the time to ask to our facilitators any curiosities or having more details on what they discussed inside their working table. While we are waiting for your questions, I would like to ask to the other colleagues, to the other facilitators, a very brief reaction in terms of if they have comments on the other tables and if they see any possibility of collaborate with them, if they found some common points hearing the other wrap-ups. Feel free, in free order, if you want, feel free to react.
Laura, I think there were so many connecting points between each of the groups, and for me, I think what is really interesting is that my group was around communicating what our promise is and what we do. I think that came across very strongly in Emma's work in terms of the positioning piece, also in terms of the narrative around young people and the importance of us to have a kind of to be seen as advocates and to be seen from a youth perspective, that we are seen as a brand that is a brand that they want to be associated with. And I think, in terms of us delivering on a promise, we will do that with really good data. So I just think there's such interconnection between all of the different working groups within the last, and I've just found I'm quite overwhelmed with the amount that's been achieved this morning in terms of I think that creative workshop was very effective.
I do agree, and thank you for finding out this connection. Any other reaction or comments?
I also thought it was quite interesting how the picture of how we imagine the food bank was pretty similar to the one Vivian's working group imagines. Basically the same, from being less only giving away food, but being more hosting and everything. I thought it was quite similar, and it was really interesting because also the communication part was a really big issue that needed resolving in our working group, that came up several times, that this needed to be improved. So I think it was interesting to see the connection there.
Thank you, Sophie.
I would echo on the partnerships piece. I think Laura, your group obviously had some great insights from that. But it's just really, and it ties strongly to Vivian's group, that you know, the role of the food banks is so much more than what people see it as. And, you know, not only do we have to communicate that, but we also have to discuss that up front with the partners and donors that we engage with, and have kind of clear expectations, because it's not just, I think someone in my group put it, we're not just beggars with our, you know, going around like pleading for food. We're solving important social and environmental problems, and we have such a pivotal role to play, as really underscored by COVID. So we need to position ourselves so that everybody we work with understands that. And then we also need to set up the operational mechanisms, as Vivian was saying, that support that. Because it's not, we're just not, you know, we're not just a nice thing to do with food waste. We're transforming surplus into opportunity, and we have such a really important role in positioning ourselves at the heart of the food system. You know, when I think about the circular economy, I think food banks are, you know, need to be at every level of the food supply chain, introducing circularity, because we're there at every stage, making sure that we add value to what would otherwise be waste. And until people start to think about us like that, we can never take that role.
And in that case, I think that talking about circular economy, the food banks might be pioneers in order to demonstrate how it works, because they already do. Food banks already do. They already include some circular principles in their operations, in the way they approach the market, in the way they interact with the food supply chain, and so on. So it's a very good insight. Thank you, Emma.
From my side, Laura, what I can say is that data can be considered like a cross layer, you know, a cross table layer, I will say, cross topic layer, which means that basically it can be used both for making decisions and both for checking that the decisions that were made were good. I think I see a great potential for developing furtherly a common platform and a common understanding of all the different operations and topics and activities that are handled within food banks. So I think that in the next years, in the next months, we will see an increasing usage of data and data science within food bank contexts.
I echo your impression, which I share in full, by adding an impression that there's also a very strong point between the role of communication and the role of developing a data set in terms of transforming data into meaningful information, and on that to base differentiated narratives, as Vivienne told us before. And it's also a matter of starting a very clear and frank conversation with the diverse partners. So it's a matter of position and reposition FEBA on one hand, but on the other hand, it's a basis from which to start with a frank partnership also with the companies, with the private sector, in order to facilitate a same language, speak the same language. So each part of the 6 working tables, I see them like pieces of a puzzle, and all together can compose the new challenge for FEBA and the food banks in order to reinvent or to strengthen furtherly what they already do. So, but Gabriela maybe or Sarah want to add something, so we close the reaction loop.
Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, Laura. Yes,
Hi, Sarah.
yes, hi. And thank you very much for this initiative and for inviting the CV to this great discussion. Indeed, in all the working table and following the presentation from the different moderators, we heard about the importance of cross-sectoral partnership and indeed the partnership with the private sector. We have CV since 2013 already. We developed a network dedicated actually to employee volunteering, with a double aim of increasing the numbers of employees participating in volunteering, but also and above all to improve the qualities of this intervention. And in this process, civil society organization, food banks, and other kind of entities, suppliers are indeed relevant to create a concrete future, especially after this period of crisis, and especially after this health and economic crisis as well. So indeed, we can only reiterate what you just said and what all the moderators said. So thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thanks to you. And meanwhile, we received quite articulated and long questions for Fabio. Be prepared. I read it through, and it's this. In addition to all of the particular challenges with data collection that vary from country to country, there is a common basic challenge, which is the need for standardizing the process of data collection, so that we can use aggregated data for all the food banks and also compare data among the food banks. Most specifically, we need to agree on what and how we are going to measure. The quantification project triggered many important discussions and achieved very important results, but we are still missing the part of data standardization. What are FEBA's plans in regard to this? We know that we have another important project on that, and so please give us some insights on that.
I'll try to do my best. It's a very challenging question. Of course, I cannot speak on behalf of FEBA because I'm not titled to do that, but the issue is absolutely relevant. There are several. It's a very hot topic, I will say, in matter of concern. We learned so much, Laura. You know that because we followed together one project last year. We know that that's an issue, and it's a very huge one that probably needs a lot of sometimes to be addressed and to be solved. What I see here is that there is not a simple answer. If we want to have a solid answer, there's not a simple one. But we can use the project and the work that we are doing on the platform, on the online observatory, as an exercise, as a field where we learn more and more and more about similarities and differences among different food banks, and we try iteration after iteration. We talk about releases. So release after release, we try to create a better tool and a better common understanding and a common set of KPIs and data sets that we can use in order to summarize in the most reliable way the complex phenomenon that we are talking about. So I will think about a journey, where day by day, step by step, test by test, we learn more, and we get a little bit closer to the final answer. What I can tell for sure is that this is a very amazing journey, and all together we can address this journey, and we can find a very smart answer to this challenge and to this issue. It's not a case that we are FEBA is like a common claim in FEBA events, because just together and just all we can find a common answer to this and many other challenges.
I do agree with you. We are together with this project. It's a long journey, but we did some important steps. We need to keep go ahead, go further. Another question for Emma this time. And the question is, food is nice to give, but the way to give food is also important. Do we see a role for food banks to influence and work with charities in this respect?
I think it's a really important question, and in our group we discussed this. I suppose one of the challenges arising with so many people finding themselves now in food poverty is, I suppose, first of all, they may not realize that they're in food poverty. They're just trying to make do or get by, and they've never had to access this type of support before. So there's a whole piece around asking for help, reducing stigma, you know, and even pointing people in the right direction. And I'm certainly by no means an expert in this, but I think it's for Food Cloud, where I work, it's certainly something that we've discussed a lot. So we reached out to our charities last year to do a survey, and again at the start of the year. And you know, one of the kind of things we tried to measure with them or discuss with them was, you know, were they seeing increasing in food insecurity? And I think food insecurity was even a term that wasn't really understood by the charity network. So I suppose one of the first observations is that people, as you know, as a result of the pandemic, have had a significant change in their circumstances. Charities have had a huge number of people who are needing support, but that doesn't even begin to measure the number of people that are needing support that aren't accessing it because they don't know about it. They don't want the stigma of having to go to a food bank. They don't want to have to ask for help. So I think there's definitely a role, and from the discussions we had today, how can we connect people with the food that is available? I think there's lots of models. There's, I suppose, it doesn't just have to be food parcels or handing out food packages. We can bring people together through shared food, and this idea of kind of, one of the presenters yesterday talked about food banks changing from actually being food banks to community hubs. And in London, there's a project called Kitchen Social, and they create shared spaces for foods that are beacons of hope for the community. And it's where kids go to play, it's where people go to share recipes. So it's not about getting food packages. It's about all of the, supports around it. It's about a social space. It's about a community space. As food banks, as the European Food Banking Network, what is our role in that? I don't think we've developed that fully, but I think we're starting to see so many different models for food sharing initiatives develop. And even we discussed about, the work that's been done in Milan with the hubs. And I think what we can do is think about how we share these with our networks. So if we can document these case studies, document the models, evaluate the benefits of them, then we can start to share them, and we can start to break down the stigmas associated with that, accessing food, have positive spaces where we have positive stories around food and communities, and create a more hopeful environment around food sharing as we get through this pandemic together.
Thank you, Emma. This is a really, really important point, of course, in providing social help and also human touch, not only food, as we know very, very well. So it's time to thank you all, of course. You did a great job, and we thank you. I think we can do that all together. We thank you, all the participants, to the working tables, for providing so many and so great ideas and inputs to FEBA and to the food banks in general terms. Thank you again. This session closes here, and we open directly the next one. And that's the moment. It's my pleasure, and also it's my honor to open the international panel of this afternoon, which is dedicated to a more strategic perspective on how to boost a food system, a more sustainable food system. And that's the occasion to welcome the panelists who are Lars Battle. You're welcome, from CAF America, Director of Thought, Leadership and Communication. I welcome also the President of FEBA, the Federation of Food Banks, European, Jacques van den Skrikke, President of European Food Bank Federation, and Paul Harris, Chief Financial Officer of Feeding America. You're welcome. And Lisa Moon, who is joining us, who is President and CEO of the Global Food Banking Network, and then Nicola Dixon, Executive Director of General Mills Foundation. So let's wait some seconds because I'm seeing some of you. You're welcome. Okay. And the other ones are entering the room. Okay, welcome you all.
Welcome. Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon. And probably Lisa Moon is coming in. Let's wait. Here we are. Okay, welcome everybody. It's my honor to welcome you to this second day of the FEBA Annual Convention 2021. As you probably could heard from the first panel, we provided some meaningful insights and inputs to FEBA and food banks, discussing specific topics on how to proceed, how to boost a more sustainable food system, and concentrated on 6 main topics, as you might have heard right before. But that's the time to provide a more strategic vision on what will be in the next future, and to organize and to optimize the time of this panel. I would like to propose you 3 rounds. So to ask you 3 main questions on which you feel free to react and to tell your daily life, your personal experience, of course, also providing some information coming from your specific organization. This is the most global and international panel, and I'm very happy to open it. So the first question I pose to you all is this one. Looking back at 2020, what are the most important lessons learned, challenging, and solutions that help your organization or your company to face this unexpected year? We know it was a dramatic year, and once again, we will have the chance to hear from you. So from Lars Battle, from CAF America, Jacques van den Skrikke, FEBA, Paul Henrys, Feeding America, Lisa Moon, the Global Food Banking Network, and Nicola Dixon, General Mills Foundation, your perspective. Feel free to react to this first question, and you're very welcome again.
Yeah.
Battle, yes.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with you all speaking on such an important topic. As an intermediary organization that facilitates global grant making from US donors, CAF America stands at the intersection of donors and nonprofits. In terms of what we've learned in this past year, we've seen a dramatic rise in donations, as one can imagine, from March 2020, particularly towards frontline relief efforts in health, safety, and food distribution. From 2019 to 2020, we saw giving to food banks increase from around $3.3 million to nearly $14.5 million, or 5 times more giving from one year to the next. Now, this doesn't mean that funders have shifted away or abandoned their existing grantees working in other issue areas, but simply have expanded their giving into disaster relief. The donations that we've seen coming from US donors have mostly been dedicated to food banks in North America, followed by Europe, Asia, and then Africa. In terms of the challenges that we've witnessed, these have been largely around creating efficient channels of communication between donors and the grantee organizations. This is one aspect where CAF America's expertise has been quite important. We connect with the charities to ensure that they're eligible to receive tax-deductible donations. We then add them to our global charity database, and then we also provide up-to-date research to donors to inform their decision-making. So As part of our own response to COVID-19, we've conducted surveys of nonprofits since the beginning of the pandemic to relay information about their status, their needs, and their outlook to donors. It's helped us to see just how incredibly resilient nonprofit organizations have been in reacting to the disruptions. While many factors can be attributed to why organizations have or have not survived this past year, we've seen that the most agile organizations have fared better than those that have not been able to quickly shift and adapt. In our most recent survey of 500 nonprofits worldwide, we found that 70% of respondents have added new services or programs. So we're seeing a strong correlation between the ability to pivot and survival. And this is across all issue areas. And one final comment I'll make is that in May of last year, we saw that 1/3 of the organizations we surveyed indicated they would not last 12 months under the current conditions. And fortunately, that number has now dropped to 17%. That's good news.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Battle. Of course, COVID was a dramatic test through which different organizations demonstrated to be very, very resilient, but also reactive and innovative. And that's somehow the positive thing, the positive aspect of this dramatic period. So thank you very much for your answer. And now we pass to Jacques van den Schrik for his answer, for his perspective. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Laura, and I salute also all the members of the panel who are all friends. Fantastic. FEBA had an amazing year in 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown many people into insecurity overnight. Suddenly, the importance of food insecurity in Europe became evident. The pandemic revealed our strengths, but also our weaknesses. It also stressed the importance of the local communities and synergized the response from public authorities, civil society as a whole, and all stakeholders in general. We were faced with the immediate challenge of finding food and of distributing it. A survey of our members shows that the demand for food increased by an average of 30%, and the new targets of poverty became apparent. Jobless people, families overnight with children overnight in problems, students also experiencing great problems because of the disappearance of their student jobs, elderly people isolated for sanitary reasons. A real concern for the charities we help was the emergence of mental health degradation. During this period, food recovery or food donations were unstable. We observed disruptions in the logistics. Our members had to face a lack of PPE, a lack of volunteers, and an increase in costs combined with a drop in financial resources. Most members of FEBA have been quick to adapt, agile, as you said, and have remained open and running. On the back of an increased media attention, there has been several initiatives, such the engagement of new and young volunteers, successful new fundraising activities, advocacy for public support, and new collaborations with corporations and foundations. FEBA launched in March 2020 a call for solidarity and established a COVID-19 Special Emergency Fund to secure the activity of its members. The response has gone beyond expectations. Between March and November, FEBA has supported its members with over 4.2 million euros for COVID-19 related actions. These included the covering of additional costs, additional staff, new vehicles, new cold rooms, renting of additional warehouse facilities, PPE, etc. 2020 has also shown an institutional response to the food insecurity scene. EU authorities have adapted rules and regulations to allow a wider utilization of funds earmarked for food aid and to support increased investments from the member states in the support of the most deprived. Even though it has been a difficult year, in 2020, FEBA members redistributed food to 48,126 charities that help and provide food to 12.8 million people in need. The increase in beneficiaries represents a 34.7% increase if compared to the 2019 figure. The food distribution also increased to 860,000 tons of food, which is an increase of 12% compared to 2019. This is, I think, the challenges that we faced during 2020 and the response that was given to these challenges thanks to the support of many persons, and in particular to the support of those who are at the same panel today. And I take this opportunity to thank them.
Thank you very much, President. Also, in your case, we experienced a great effort in innovating and investing in equipment and operations, and also in people, due to also to the deep change in the context and the differentiated roles of the different stakeholders. So, thank you very much for your answer. And now I would like to ask the same question to Paul Henrys, Chief Financial Officer of Feeding America. And you're welcome very much.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to everyone participating this morning or this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And again, it's an honor for me to have this conversation with my colleagues, or as Jacques said, my friends on the panel this morning. And I appreciate the question, right? And it had me thinking about three things in particular that we have been talking a bit about in the States relative to the impact of the pandemic. The first thing really revolves around the impact of food supply. So prior to the crisis, the charitable food system relied heavily on salvageable food waste, rescued from predominantly retail and manufacturing food channels. And those two channels in particular represented roughly 70% of the food that was rescued in any given year. The risk in that is that it's an over-reliance. And in the States, once the pandemic hit, the donated volume from those channels began to dissipate, primarily because of consumer demand. So you saw families and individuals do what they needed to do, which was to access food from retailers and groceries, etc. But that put a constraint on the food that was available to be donated to the food bank network. And it really put us, the Feeding America Network, and our food bank partners in a position where we needed to think differently about how we were accessing food. And we engaged partners, an example being manufacturers who had lines focused on restaurants or food service operations that were idle roughly at the moment because a number of restaurants were closed. And we began conversations that we hadn't had before about how we could think differently about accessing the food. We also made sure that we reinforce our efforts to partner with our government and really understanding what they could do to ensure that they were extending the resources that are available today to those struggling with hunger. Another area that we spent a lot of time thinking about was around volunteers. Food banks have historically been reliant on volunteers for repacking and distributing of food. During the pandemic, given the nature of social distancing, food banks in the States reported an average of 67% decline in their volunteer base, which is dramatic. And it meant that they quickly needed to innovate and move to low contact and or no contact food packing and distribution models, right? And so from a solution perspective, we spent time thinking about how can the food be packed differently or earlier so that it can be distributed easily and without contact to those who need it. In addition to thinking differently about partners, we were fortunate that in many cases, members of our National Guard were able to step in and act as volunteers to support the food bank network, as well as partnering with other organizations who are experts in volunteering. The third area that we have spent a lot of time talking about as well is unfortunately not new for us, but the pandemic really shed light on the fact that communities of color in the States are more likely to face hunger, right? 1 in 13 white households face hunger. In contrast, 1 in 6 Latino households face hunger. 1 in 5 Black households face hunger, and 1 in 4 Native American households face hunger. And as we thought about our response to the pandemic and our response broadly to hunger in the States, we recognized that we needed to further invest in our ability to reduce that disparity. As we think about the long term and our need to end hunger in the States, not only do we need to do that globally, but we need to make sure that we are focused on addressing and reducing those disparities in those communities.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you two for bringing us the lessons learned from Feeding America, lessons that are so many and varied and takes into account both the necessity to face urgency, but at the same time to think on a long term. So thank you very much. And I invite now to answer to the same questions about lessons learned and challenges, Lisa Moon, who is welcome. She's President and CEO of the Global Food Banking Network. You're welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To follow on, I think, what Jacques and Paul have shared, and we all work together very closely. The Global Food Banking Network serves food banks in 44 countries, really focused, though, on Latin America, Asia Pacific, and increasingly in Sub-Saharan Africa. So when the pandemic began more than a year ago now, we actually saw that our members in Asia were really at the front lines of this. And they had the experience from previous coronaviruses, SARS, of course, avian flu, and knew more or less how it might affect the communities. And so very early on in the pandemic, we were able to benefit from their knowledge and their learnings, which became very important in our global response. Communities that we work with witnessed a lot of the same things that Jacques and Paul have already discussed. Essentially prior to the pandemic, we knew that 1 in 4 people globally faced food insecurity. And with this immediate loss in income caused by lockdowns and closures, many places very strongly enforced, there was a significant spike in demand for food relief. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our most important takeaways as an organization from this past year, understanding all the disruptions in supply, contrasted with the rise in demand, and how food banks and the social service agencies that they support, especially in emerging and developing markets, responded to this. The first takeaway for us was really that the future of humanitarian response, as we consider it globally, has to rest really around the importance of local organizations. Prior to, it would be 5 years ago, I would say, I think as the data is from that, only about 2% of all funds invested globally in humanitarian response went to local organizations. For too long, the international community has really prioritized either UN organizations, which play an absolutely critical role in emergencies, or meta international organizations to do this work. With the rise in climate change, we're seeing far more natural disasters than we have in the past. There's significantly more conflict in the world, and the time for when we could rely on a small group of international organizations to handle these humanitarian crises truly has passed. And what we really saw is that obviously with the pandemic, you had humanitarian emergencies in many cases occurring in dozens of geographies across the world. And food banks were really on the front lines of that, having to step into a role, many times without government support, in a way that they had not been asked to before. So we saw 91% of the members that we work with, of course, saw significant increases in demand. For 65% of the members that we work with, that demand more than doubled. And only 5 of the food banks that we serve benefited from any partnership with government. So it truly was a civil society response to the pandemic. And as we think about the learnings of this past year, we just are so incredibly grateful and feel honored to have the privilege of working with civil society organizations that are providing this vital support in their communities, but are just doubling down on our commitment to emphasize how important it is to be investing locally as we rebuild and as we think about resilience and response in the future. The second thing that we really learned from the pandemic, and this kind of goes back to the comments that Paul made about food supply, most of the organizations that we work with, as Paul had mentioned, similar to the States, relied almost entirely on recovery. And this is incredibly important. About 98% of the food flowing through the food banks that we work with was recovery pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, it was approximately 16%, just because there was so much disruption in supply chains. But because of the development of infrastructure, or frankly, the lack thereof, the food banks that we work with were not able to take advantage of the supply chain disruptions in many of the ways that they could have had there been greater investment prior to the pandemic. And so one of the things that we really took away from was that the supply chain disruptions that occurred, we really have to think about much more so, how do we invest in the infrastructure, not only to take food from farm to market, but even from there, what about, how do we think about recovery, redistribution, in a much more holistic and systematic way? So these were just some of the things that our network is thinking about as we look ahead. Of course, the COVID emergency for food banks around the world has not let up. I think all of us, of course, are very aware of the crisis happening in India right now, and in many other parts of the world, we're seeing a return to closures. And what's challenging is that early on in the pandemic, of course, there were lockdowns. There was a significant concern about transmission, the risk of transmission, but the case counts were just not what we are seeing now. And so what we're seeing, for example, in an India situation, in a situation in Brazil, some countries in Central America, certainly some countries in South America, the Philippines, is that when you have these widespread transmission, it's very, very challenging to continue food distribution, because you truly at that point are having incredible risk to your distribution personnel. In some parts of the network, we've seen about a 25% shutdown, for example, in agency partners. They're either not able to continue working with vulnerable populations because of the health risks or because of the economic contraction they've been forced to close. So one of the things that we're thinking about too is just how do we make sure that we're able to sustain and rebuild as the crisis persists.
Thank you very much. Your effort is truly impressive, and also you stress the importance of investing on small local organization and civil society organization. That's a key point to boost a more sustainable food system also in the long run. So thank you very much also for your contribution. And now I pass to Nicola Dixon, Executive Director of General Mills Foundation. You're welcome.
Yeah, well, good morning and good afternoon again, everyone. And for those who maybe joined since we began some comments here this session, Laura had kindly asked each of us to just reflect on some of the lessons learned of the pandemic so far. And what I wanted to note about that is if you hear any of us using the past tense about the pandemic, we fully acknowledge and understand, as was noted a moment ago, that unfortunately, COVID is still very much impacting communities in regions around the globe and communities. And so we offer these reflections as some of the lessons learned, I think, and observations so far. And thank you all. It was wonderful hearing from these other leaders. We are fortunate at General Mills to partner with the Global Food Banking Network, with FEBA and Feeding America and Charities Aid Foundation. So I'll offer that both as gratitude and thanks, as well as disclosure that I do have, my team and I have the honor of working with these other panelists throughout the year and around the world, which is something we're so grateful for. So I thought I would offer a perspective from the combined vantage point of our company. So General Mills is a multinational food company. We do operate not only in North America, but Europe, Asia, Australia, Latin America, under 100 different brands. So if you don't know the name General Mills, you might know us as Latina Fresh Pasta in Australia, or Wan Chai Fairy Dumplings in China, Betty Crocker products, or some of our cereal and grain bar brands, right? So we are what they call in food a house of brands. And so from that vantage point as a business, but as well as a company that is very committed to global social impact, so through our philanthropy and our charitable lens as well. And just touching on a couple of those. Broadly speaking, I would just begin by saying that, as a reflection, we've been so incredibly in awe of and humbled by the nature of the response from community partners as well as our employees, in terms of the level of ingenuity, commitment, compassion, strategic collaboration. If anybody ever thought that the civil society sector, the charitable sector, or food bank sector wasn't as innovative as the for-profit or private sector, we say, like, we've got news for you. We see amazing things every day that really, really put things into perspective. And so that has been just incredible to see. And I would say that from a total company or organizational perspective, we very, very soon after it became clear that COVID would indeed be a global pandemic. And I think we all there in a period of days, if not, a week or so, quickly gained that consciousness that of the potential magnitude, scope, and duration of this event. We became, I think, quite clear-eyed and focused as a company, recognizing our critical role and opportunity to really fully activate our purpose. And, in a non-COVID environment, our purpose is all about making food the world loves. And we recognized as we saw COVID unfolding that it would be beyond that. It would be about making food the world needs more than ever. To rise to that challenge, I think one of the things that was crucial and so fundamental, and I think some of the other speakers have commented on how so much of what's worked has been about focusing on the fundamentals, for us, people and food. And so we had to ensure, and we knew it would be critical, that we continued to make sure our 38,000 employees around the globe who enable us to make food every day in all these countries, they had to remain safe and healthy. And no small feat, right? In this type of environment, it's always a priority for us, health and safety, but we recognize that the pandemic would be asking so much more of us. It would be requiring us to do more, make more. We couldn't nourish the world if our people weren't safe and healthy, right? So that was very much job one. And I would say that by all accounts, our employee response has been really incredible and humbling. Despite the enormous disruption that all of you, participating in this conference are so keenly aware of, and despite the disruption, I would add going on in the communities where our employees live, sometimes in their own households, right? So this was certainly personal in many, many cases. Nonetheless, through our employees, we were able to rise up to really operate in ways we never have before to meet the unprecedented global demand for food. The biggest, thinking about our charitable response, one thing that we're always mindful of, and some of us that work in the philanthropy and social impact group, we're a little bit biased, but we do recognize that the biggest lever we have as a multinational food company is making more food and the way we nourish and show up every day through our products. But despite that, we absolutely have very strong alignment and values rooted in the additional role that a charitable response can play. So I'll just share a little bit about what that looked like and what it has encompassed so far. And I would say through our corporate giving, as well as through our foundation, it's one combined team that I have the honor of working with every day, we were able to go beyond our usual base philanthropy and giving and align with our trustees to be able to provide about $9 million US in charitable grants specific to COVID response. And we felt it was really critical that food bank networks and our partners on the front lines addressing hunger had resources that would enable them to quickly pivot and adapt to situations and as was mentioned, stand up new programs, in some cases entirely new operating models very quickly. And we couldn't expect them to do that if we weren't, I think, all prepared as funders and partners to help create an enabling environment for them to do that. And then meanwhile, on the company side, we did stand up manufacture to donate schemes in a couple of markets. We took some quick lessons from our colleagues in Australia, our Australian businesses. We replicated that in the United States, and I think Paul was kindly making reference to some of that. And we recognized that at no other point in time would we have reduced demand on our manufacturing lines that provide food for schools and restaurants. And that's a big part of our North American business. So we were actually able to take advantage of production lines that were being underutilized as schools across the states, more than 110,000, rapidly closed last year. Similarly with restaurants during lockdown, and say, gosh, maybe we can produce millions more whole grain waffles and baked goods for meeting the nutritional needs of students that are still in school, but they're now online. We saw amazing programs stood up, such as school buses being converted to child and family meal delivery drop-off services at the end of the family driveway, and so forth. And so the innovation was just really, really impressive. And so all in, the response in terms of the heightened food donations, our brands standing up, the Produce to Donate, that enabled about 17 million additional meals during 2020 portion of COVID. I'm looking forward to getting our tally for the last 6 months quite soon. And then finally, I'll just mention that, I'll underscore the response is every individual and area of the company. So, it's not just about manufacturing. It's not just about philanthropy, right? We coordinated with public health officials around our world headquarters, as well as our locations worldwide, to host on-site vaccination clinics, which was really key, not only for employees, but that can help keep the entire community safe. And, again, the importance of keeping the food lines running, right? So those are just a handful of examples. Overall, I would say it's just that level of coordination and ingenuity, the agility that has been seen, especially in this area of the food sector, has been, I think, humbling as well as inspiring, because I think it helps us all see what is possible when we think about broader transformation outside of an emergency context.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for your intervention, Nicola Dixon, and also for stressing the importance of matching together commitment and compassion with innovation and strategic intent and reasoning at a global stage, and at the same time acting on specific, concrete, local situations. So thank you very much. Right, we concluded the first round. we have the pleasure to hear from the panelists the perspective of the 3 networks of the food banks plus General Mills Foundation. So this is a very global panel, and that's the case to ask you the second question, which is what are the key aspects or elements that you see in the future of your organization? We can start again if you want with the same order, if you
Okay.
like. Okay.
Sure.
So
I wanted to wait.
I
till
open the
call
floor
upon.
to Lars Battle. You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, at CAF America, we're committed to building up the resilience of the nonprofit sector by informing donors and providing them with these data-driven tools to make strategic decisions. And we're seeing the ways in which donors are responding to accommodate the needs of nonprofits. I wanted to share some of these. They're increasing their funding. They're offering changes to grant purposes. They're limiting some of the reporting requirements that add an additional burden on nonprofits for the existing grants that they have. Providing flexible funding to allow grantee organizations the freedom to pivot where they need to, and extending funding commitments in many cases as well. Last year, we surveyed corporate donors from diverse industries, among them many Fortune 500 companies, to understand how their priorities have shifted during the pandemic. And I'm sure that Nicola can speak to this as well. And we were pleased to find significantly greater flexibility being offered to nonprofits to allow them to navigate the difficult circumstances. Our survey showed that 90% of corporate respondents offered some kind of flexibility to grantee needs in 3 primary areas. In changes to grant purpose, which allowed organizations to redirect funds to the most immediate needs, through grant extensions, and by funding operational expenses or needs-based funding, which has been critical during the pandemic. And some really great news. Also, we asked about the donors' outlook for the future, and 2/3 of corporate respondents expected to maintain these increased levels of funding or further expand their funding in the coming year. Another key finding was that around 40% of corporate respondents indicated that they plan to revise their disaster relief strategies. So this, of course, includes food security funding. That's a great sign. We're seeing that this increase in flexible funding as a positive signal that donors are being more receptive, are changing their perspective and their approach to philanthropy. As we move forward as an organization, we'll continue our commitment to enabling cross-border philanthropy by supporting donors to give to causes anywhere in the world, including into challenging markets. What I mean by this is that during the pandemic, we've seen a fluctuating regulatory environment for charitable giving. Some countries are making it easier to receive foreign funding, while others have become more challenging. And we are committed to being aware of the ways in which donors can remain compliant with local laws to deliver funding effectively and efficiently. We have another report coming out next week on May 12th, and we invite you all to tune in to our launch webinar as it will further expand on some of these points.
Thank you very much. And what about the key points for the future of FEBA? Jacques van der Scriet, you're welcome.
First of all, when I hear what my colleagues are saying, I fully realize that food banking in Europe, in America, or in Africa, or in Asia is a totally different story. And so we all do the same job, but obviously emphasis on certain things is more important than on others, depending on the situation, depending on the food supply, depending on the food oversupply. So with a lot of humbleness, I would say that our key aspects in the future of our organization must be taken as what we believe is going to be important, not for the immediate future, but for the medium to long-term issues. The digitalization process in which FEBA has embarked upon with the support of the European Union Commission and of the General Mills Foundation is an important element for us to build a collection of reliable data on the activities of our members and other stakeholders. We will need to ensure that all our members, and we have 29 at this point in time, are properly equipped to participate in this digital community and to participate at an equal level of knowledge and be conversant with the systems that we are busy putting into place. The constant monitoring of the inevitable food transformation system will also be crucial to assist our members so that they can exploit to the fullest food donation, food waste avoidance, and the promotion of healthy food consumption. So funds and food donation raising will continue to be a key element, obviously, of the activity of FEBA. And whilst we perform a key role in representing food assistance activity in the European Union environment, FEBA intends to stress the role of food banks in the food system and to consolidate this position with all stakeholders, including food industry, agriculture, public authorities, other NGOs eventually. Last but not least, we are, I believe, vivid members of the civil society. FEBA's voice will join the voice of all those who fight for the moralization of our society. I believe food insecurity is more predominant where there is no democracy. Obviously, we have to include in this voice the various aspects that involve a moralization of our society, which is the social, economic, ecological, and health chapters. And we can add the voice of our network. I think our network is a vast network. It was said earlier in the day that we don't understand the power of our network, but I'm sure that with the 3 networks that are participating today at this panel, we would be even more strong and more powerful to make sure that at the end of the day, what we do is actually assisting in the moralization of our society.
Thank you very much, President. And now I ask to Paul Henrys, what are the key points for Feeding America and thinking about the future?
Thank you, Laura. The pandemic and our response shed light on some of the greatest needs and the enormous potential for a lot of future solutions. And I want to touch on something Nicola said around the fact that we're still in it, right? And we think the impact and the effects of the pandemic will continue. For hunger in the United States prior to the pandemic, the Feeding America Network provided access to over 4 billion meals a year. Post and connected with and engaged with close to 40 million Americans. In the middle of the pandemic, both in terms of providing access to meals and as it relates to connecting with Americans, both numbers increased 40 to 50%. That and something Lisa talked about has put an incredible strain on the network itself, both as it relates to its physical infrastructure and its people, right? And our focus as we look ahead into the future is just making sure we're doing everything possible to strengthen the capacity of the network and its ability to meet the demand that's out there and support and partner with communities across the country. The second area that we're really focused in on, and I'm going to repeat myself a little bit from my previous comments, is really making sure that we're leaning into the government's role in the response. We continue to engage. We engage every single administration, whether it was the prior administration at the beginning of the pandemic or the current administration as we continue to respond to the pandemic and talk about what's possible as it relates to the nutrition programs supported by the government, in addition to other legislation that supports incentives for other private sector partners to continue to work with us. Third area we are focused on is around public engagement. As in the States in particular, as you think back over the last 12 to 16 months, the awareness of the issue of hunger, the engagement of individuals, foundations, of private sector corporations has increased dramatically. Prior to the pandemic, I would say we were grateful and fortunate for partners like General Mills and CAF. As we continue through the pandemic, I would say that we are blown away by their continued generosity to everyone, not only in the States, but globally. And we know that in order for us to ensure that we sustain the response, that we want to make sure that we're working closely together moving forward. And where I'll close is our focus also continues to be on what more we can do to engage and elevate the experience of people who are accessing support through the network, making sure that we understand and leverage their expertise and knowledge. We are merely vessels in supporting what their efforts. And so as we think about how we engage communities across the country, we are ensuring that we're putting them at the center of everything that we do in all of our decision making.
Thank you very much. Lisa Moon from the Global Food Banking Network, what are your key points for the future?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, I just want to echo what Nicola, I think, said just about the incredible innovation of food banks that we've seen, especially in our networks. And I'm so encouraged. About 25% of the GFN network is made up of food banks that were founded in the last 5 years. And they're located in places that traditionally have far less developed civil society organizations. They obviously had very small budgets going into this, with not as stable support as you would have if you're as an established organization. But they have done amazing things. Within this group, most have doubled their service delivery during the pandemic, and they are sustaining that level of support more than a year in. So as an organization, we are committed to supporting new food banks in high-need communities, primarily those in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. This includes working with our existing partners, but also in thinking about how do we come alongside entrepreneurs that want to be part of the solution to hunger for their neighbors, their families, their friends. Since the start of the pandemic, we've received more than 100 inquiries from more than 30 countries of people wanting to start food banks. So we're thinking through how do we best service and support those individuals, those organizations that want to take on this important work as we rebuild. Second, we're also committed to helping established organizations reach more vulnerable communities. Whether this is in Colombia, where there's an amazing food banking network that is opening new distribution sites along the Venezuelan border to provide service to displaced persons, or in Brazil, where Mesa Brazil, which experienced a 50% budget cut at the start of the pandemic, rapidly increased its service delivery in spite of that, and they continue to serve very remote communities such as indigenous persons in the Amazon, or in India, where our courageous partners there are continuing relief in 100 cities. So these are the types of groups that are serving very high needs communities. They're established organizations. At this point, they just need support to help scale. A third focus for us is around schools, and as schools open up in certain parts of the world, it's going to be such an important priority to make sure that we're able to get children back into school. In many places, there's increased financial pressure on families. Perhaps their parents are in the informal workforce, and there's pressure to keep children at home, to provide domestic care or take care of domestic work, or even earn income. And providing meals at school provides such a valuable resource to compel families to send their kids back. So in our network, food banks in 24 countries are involved with school feeding. And as schools reopen, we really want to think about how can we be providing key support there so that families send their kids back to school and send their girls back to school in particular. And fourth, we are just going to have to continue to have a major focus on food sourcing. Last year, GFN made about 200 emergency grants. We granted nearly 10 times more than we ever had at GFN. And for the grants to our members, about half of those funds went to food purchase. So with demand continuing to be very high, even as we rebuild, reopen, you still have an enormous, number of people that have lost income or continue to be underemployed. We've really got to think about, how are we going to sustain product so that we can provide diverse offerings to those that need it.
Thank you. Thanks to you too. We are assisting to a great variety of areas of intervention and key points. That's the richness of this panel. And I thank you very much for your insights. And about General Mills Foundation, what are your key points?
You bet. So on this question, I think I'll give one example, and that might enable us to, I know there's a third question we want you'd like to get to. So I'll just give one example. As a company, as well, many of you are aware, we're already highly focused on encouraging and supporting the broad adoption by farmers of what we call regenerative agricultural principles on farms all over the world. I think you'll see us engaging even more so around this area in the coming years because of just the enormous potential and the benefits it brings that span both people and planet. And, we think about so much of this conference, and even, of course, the UN Food Systems Summit later this year, is really centered on how do we balance these mutually grand challenges of feeding more people in the world and the stage of the climate crisis we're in, and these critical years we know that we're in and that are facing us regarding the urgency and the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so we need solutions that are as grand as the challenges before us. And fortunately, regenerative agriculture is actually one of those. The reason we would say it is, so high potential for its impact around the world for both climate and feeding more people sustainably is that, the benefits are so strong and they accrue across so many areas in society. They give farmers and farms more resiliency to climate shocks. They can, when soil is healthier, you can survive droughts or even sudden precipitation events more easily. The community members enjoy greater food availability, cleaner water, greater water supply, reduced pollution, etc. And also just flourishing ecosystems and biodiversity. So farming practices that actually not only sustain natural resources and conserve them, but really help to regenerate ecosystems through deliberate diversification efforts, right? And so, what we see is that, broadly speaking, collectively, the benefits from regenerative agriculture for both people and planet they're at a potential scale that can meet the moment or the era we're in of needing to address the climate crisis while feeding more people.
Thank you. Thank you very much also to you. And now we are at the third question. As you know, FEBA Annual Convention is a recognized UN Food Systems Independent Dialogue. And this is a very precious occasion to ask you this question, which is what message would you like to share as a contribution to the United Nations Food Systems Summit, who is organized for sure for this year? So what's the message you would like to share with you and Food System Summit? We start again with Lars Battle, and I'm welcoming you again.
Thank you so much, Laura. We can't lose momentum. This is the message. Over the course of the past year, we've seen amazing innovations in response to the increased needs of vulnerable communities. I think it's important to take a moment to reflect on the successes in the midst of all of these challenges. I had a conversation recently with members of a food bank operating in Madrid, Manos de Ayuda Social, that they've shifted their food distribution strategy to weekly food pickups, making it easier on their beneficiaries in terms of the logistics and avoided costs of transportation, daily transportation, while enhancing their own efficiency. And through this strategy, they've been able to maintain their services. Another example, of course, is FEBA. One that I know is representative of so many of your experiences, this complete transition in the volunteer workforce to an entirely different demographic of younger volunteers, not to mention all of the logistical challenges that have been confronted. It just shows the empathy and compassion that the crisis has brought out. And we were so happy to feature FEBA in our Volume 5 report, survey report, to tell this impressive story of adaptation that I know is so similar across the globe. I know that we're running out of time, so I would just say that ultimately I think that finding ways for nonprofits to deepen and widen partnerships with donors, with supporters at every opportunity to grow that support network is going to be key to the solution. For CAF America, we'll continue working with donors and corporations to build out better partnerships and strategies with nonprofits for long-term impact and sustainability. And as I said, these partnerships will be critical so that nonprofits are more prepared to face future emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a really important message. And now a message coming from FEBA, Jacques van der Squeek. You're muted. You're muted. Okay, it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. This is a difficult one. As I said earlier, I believe that food banking is an activity which is multifaceted. There are realities that vary from country to country, sometimes within a single country. Those realities are also different. So in terms of what is the message that we should bring to the UN summit, I think it should be a univocal message. I think it should be a message that is written by, I would suggest, all the participants of this panel together, where all those realities and the priorities would be actually put forward. The role of food banking in the world is so important in today. It has been for many, many years, and it's still more important today. And for the years to come, we are not going to recover from the COVID crisis in a couple of months. The economy might do so, the people not. So I would suggest, if my colleagues are in agreement with me, that we pursue this conversation outside of this public panel, and that we try to put together words that would satisfy every party around the table, and transfer and promote a single strong message to the UN summit.
Thank you very much for the message, but also for the proposal. And now I ask to Paul Henrys about his message.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to build on Lars and Jacques' comments. Just as it relates to talking about partnerships, right? This is an opportunity for all of us collectively to continue to work together. You've heard me talk at length about partnerships with governments, right? And the critical role that they play not only in the States, but that they can play globally to support responding to not only the pandemic, but the longer term issues related to hunger in the food system, as well as finding opportunities to strengthen public-private partnerships. There's value for both parties to continue to work together and strengthen and build communities is what we're all trying to do. And lastly, I think touching a little bit upon what I mentioned before, just ensuring that we continue to not forget about the disparities that exist in communities across our country and the States and across the globe, and making sure that we are doing what we can to intervene and reduce the gaps that exist. Thank you.
Thanks to you too. Thank you very much. And now, Lisa Moon, your message to the UN.
Yes, so just echoing what Paul and Jacques have said is that, just the important role that governments play, specifically in providing social protection. I mean, food banks provide incredible support, but the reality is that their efforts in no way alone can do this, and that especially in a world, I think that the International Labor Organization estimates that 1 in 2 people have no access to social protection, which means those needs are falling entirely on civil society. That's something that absolutely has to be rectified and needs to be part of a food systems response to the hunger crisis. The second thing is that the UN food systems could make recommendations that governments embrace policy changes that make it easier to donate food than it is to throw it away. And this could be everything from liability protection at the national level to incentives to donate surplus product, which exist in far few places. And so with those types of interventions, food banks will be able to have access to so much more of this surplus food that is wholesome and edible and help get it into the hands of people that need it. The third thing is that there's already discussions at the G7, the G20 level of how we can come together as a global community to support recovery and rebuilding. And very much so as part of these packages, as part of official development assistance, as part of investment platforms, if there is indeed a Zero Hunger Fund that comes out of the UN Food Systems Summit, I would just encourage those that are organizing it to consider food banks as a key partner in those endeavors. They are already providing so much support in their communities. They act as voices for those that are often invisible in society, and their networks and their work can be such an asset as we think about how do we create this hunger-free future.
Thank you very much. And Nicola Dixon, what's your message coming from General Mills Foundation?
Yeah, well, I would echo what Jacques and Lisa mentioned about, maybe a unified vision. A voice from the food bank sector would be, I think, most powerful. But I would echo as well that just the unique vantage point and the strategic contributing role of the food bank sector should be elevated. And I think the Food Systems Summit would enormously benefit from really centering and elevating the food bank sector's insights, if you think about the unique positionality of the sector to be able to, every day see and interact and coordinate with this multitude of partners, from schools and government and public authorities to the private sector and citizen volunteers, to be able to see where the gaps and the weak links are, as well as, the opportunities that we can't always get to, right, because of the dire needs before us. Just a wealth of insight that I think the food bank sector can offer. And I hope that would also illuminate the need and opportunity to ensure that across nations there is sufficient funding and resourcing made available to food banks, to enable them, while still enabling them to maintain full independence, because that's part of the agility and adaptability I think they have today. I think you could benefit from much broader support for food banks across the globe. And then finally, I would say there's also a challenge or an opportunity I think we might contemplate, and that is so often, with our work and our conferences, we are sort of in the habit of talking about creating a sustainable system, but we might, pose the thought or challenge for us all to say, might we even need to set our sights higher and think about what would it mean to bring about a regenerative food system that is not only going to help the food system flourish, but the communities that are served through the food system and interact with it, and the ecosystems that we depend on for food. And so sometimes it can really shift and expand our thinking when we think about a regenerative potential, one that makes us, that derives growth and multiple forms of positive benefits beyond just sort of sustaining and getting to a state that is repeatable. So going from sustainability to regeneration, I think, is an opportunity as the UN Food Systems Summit gets further defined and designed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought for the UN Food Systems Summit. I am sure about that. Thank you. Thank you all for your insightful, meaningful insights, and thank to these distinguished speakers of this panel. We could have impressive and meaningful insights coming from all over the world. You shared with us your lessons learned together with the global and local challenges you are facing on a daily basis, and also the key points for the future of your organization. So I thank you very much. I think that these are important contributions together with all what we saw and heard also yesterday during this very important convention for the UN Food Systems Summit, and in general terms to boost a more sustainable food system. Thank you very much. It was an honor to moderate this matter. Now we can close this session and we can take a break of 10 minutes in order to respect the schedule and our time slot. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, good afternoon. Welcome again to the final part of this intense journey we did starting from yesterday. It was a really, really rich debate and dialogue. And this is the final moment for the closing remarks. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome Adriana Sukova, Deputy Director General of the DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion of the European Commission, together with the President of FEBA, President Jacques van Schrik, for the closing remarks. But let's start with Adriana Sukova. You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry. In the last 2 days, I have used, I don't know how many web place tools. So I'm really confused if I manage. But thank you very much. And dear Mr. President of the European Federation of Food Banks and ladies and gentlemen, in fact, I want to thank you for the invitation today, because I think that the title for Sustainable Future Food System is very important and very telling. It is key now that we build the foundations for a sustainable and fair society, in particular for the young generations. The social and economic crisis linked to the COVID pandemic have amplified and exacerbated the pre-existing social inequalities, and this is evident everywhere. A rising number of people across Europe have begun to fall into food poverty and are increasingly trying to relying on food banks and similar services to be able to meet basic needs. In this context, I would like to highlight the invaluable and selfless work of your member organizations that have had to face increasing pressure to support the most deprived in these difficult times. Your work to expand your membership by creating new food banks where they are most needed is particularly important in the current situation. Also, the EU funds have played an important role in addressing food poverty. Our famous Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived, with a budget of 3.8 billion euro for the 2014-2020 period, has provided support to 13 million people, and 30% of these supported people were children. So this goes through the collaboration of the partner organizations, such as the food banks that you represent. The aim of the organization, the Federation of Food Banks, to optimize the participation of its members in the EU social dimension by reinforcing the knowledge and understanding of social policies, in particular through the FEAD, is key to enhance partnerships between the EU and local food banks. And I've always said that the FEAD implementation created a lot of synergies and a lot of additional positive impacts on partner organizations, and including the creation of some food banks around Europe. The support of FEAD has brought also an important contribution to fight against poverty and social exclusion. The challenges that we face were already substantial before the crisis. Just over 21% of the adult population and over 23% of children were at risk in poverty and social exclusion. And we know that 27 million people were experiencing material deprivation. Both the crisis and with the crisis, it was made even clearer that we needed more action and more to do. We needed more resources, while the social restrictions addressing the health emergency have changed the way your organizations work, delivering food and material assistance. In response to the coronavirus pandemic, the Commission adopted 2 coronavirus response investment initiatives, and they provided an extraordinary flexibility in the use of the European Structural Investment Funds last year in April. Moreover, these amendments to the rules for the implementation of the funds introduced specific measures to support the most deprived by also adjusting the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived regulation, and made it possible to deliver food and basic material assistance through vouchers, but also providing personal protective equipment to those who are doing this job. It also enabled financing measures with a co-financing rate of 100% for the accounting year 2020 and 2021. By the end of April this year, the uptake of all these flexibilities provided under the CRI and CRI Plus resulted in program amendments in 9 member states, which are Austria, Spain, France, Croatia, Hungary, Luxembourg, Italy, Portugal, and Romania. And the member states decided to use the 100% co-financing rate in 8 of the cases. And also we saw in 4 member states introduction of the emergency measures to respond to the COVID pandemic. In addition, the Recovery Assistance for Cohesion and the Territories of Europe, it's very known as REACT-EU, which is part of the Next Generation EU Recovery Scheme, provides additional resources to cohesion policy programs and also enables member states to inject further resources into the FEAD programs. According to the information, so far, member states are planning to use around 1% of the REACT-EU resources, which are at 37.5 billion this year. And usually, you know, the FEAD allocation is around 3%, but we've seen that Belgium is going to suggest an increase by 10%, Bulgaria by 5%, and Romania by 5% of their current FEAD programs. So in order to ensure that the quick delivery of the needed material support is on place, the member states will receive a pre-financing of 11% for any allocation which is made through the REACT-EU. This is a continuation of the current system of allowing 11% pre-financing to the FEAD programs. Also, the European Social Fund Plus, which is our next generation legal base, will ensure continued support to address material deprivation through food and basic material assistance to the most deprived, and also provide accompanying measures supporting their social inclusion. We have an obligation in the regulation, which will enter into force end of June, where member states should devote 3%, at least 3% of their national ESF Plus resources to support the most deprived. And this is one of the agreed thematic concentration requirements for the next period. We have an ongoing study that should be finalized this month, and it also is looking at simplified cost options for food donations in order to introduce further simplifications and facilitate the administrative handling of food donations under DSF+. In this respect, I would like to thank FEBA for the support that you have provided to our consultant, and we are looking forward for the final report very soon. The objective of thematic concentration requirements are to ensure that critical mass review support from the funds is allocated to certain policy objectives which are of highest European importance. In particular, the thematic concentration under DSF Plus should ensure that the fund contributes to the maximum extent for the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The European Pillar of Social Rights is our social strategy to bring fairness to all people in the European Union, and the 20 principles of the pillar are fully aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular in terms of employment, education and skills, fighting poverty, and promoting equal opportunities. The European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, which was adopted in March this year, provides for an EU-wide framework for tackling poverty with targets and clear actions. It sets the target of reducing the number of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion by at least 15 million by 2030, including at least 5 million less children, which is both ambitious, but we also know realistic, and we want to return to a good path of economic and social convergence. The action plan puts forward an integrated approach to address needs at all stages of life and target the root causes and manifestations of poverty and social exclusion. This integrated approach includes an update of our 2013 recommendation on investing in children through the adoption of the European Child Guarantee, the setting up of a European platform on combating homelessness, and the work for a new framework on minimum income. As you know, today the informal leaders meeting of the EU Social Summit is taking place in Porto, starting today with a high-level conference, and we expect that tomorrow's informal meeting summit on the social policy will provide first a clear message to European citizens that social rights and social cohesion must stand at the heart of the recovery and the green and digital transitions. We expect them to confirm support for the targets at the highest political level and also send a strong political signal reconfirming our joint commitment to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. It will be a moment to rally forces around the concrete delivery of the European Pillar of Social Rights and its action plan, with the aim of eradicating poverty and social exclusion, including through food security. I want to thank you again for your valuable work, and I can assure you that the European Commission is working forward to continue our fruitful cooperation with the Federation, but also with its members nationally, because we believe that they are our key partner, and they have been so in the last years. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Sukova, for your intervention, important intervention. And just 2 seconds before opening the floor to the president of FEBA, an information. You know that all the video recordings and presentations and materials of this 2-day convention will be available on the website annualconvention.eurofoodbank.org. And now it's time to open the floor to Jacques Vandenskrik for the closing remarks.
My dear friends all over the world today, I must say that this has been our very first convention that is held by way of video conferencing. It has been a fantastic experience, extremely dense, but I sincerely hope that next year we will be able to meet in person, because we food bankers are very much social animals, and we need to see one another, we need to chat to one another, we need to exchange, and we need that feeling of belonging to a single community. It is so my closing remark for these 2 very intense and dense days. I mean, whether it is with top panelists yesterday, whether it is with the working tables today, the international panel, and the encouraging words of you, Madam Director General, I think it is my duty now to say thank you. To say thank you to the Česka Federace Potravinovych Bank, and in particular to the President Alice Slavicek, Veronika Lakova, Brotislav Racek, for their precious collaboration in the organization of this annual event. I would like to thank once more the European Commission, and in particular the EASY program, for supporting the organization of this event. The General Mills Foundation for their daily partnership, what a shoulder to have, and the collaboration to organize this event as well. I'd like to thank you, Laura Gavinelli, for moderating and guiding us through these 2 very dense days with professionalism, but also with empathy. All the speakers for sharing valuable food for thought, and this food we will not waste. Mariana and Paula from Altisensi to encourage us to think out of the box. What an exercise. All the facilitators of the working tables of this morning, Fabio, Laura, Vivienne, Gabriella, Sarah, and Emma. A special mention to the group of young generations, and in particular Anna, Irene, Sophie, and Suzanne. Elisa, thank you for the beautiful visual identity of our event. Marielle for catching the key messages of our event with wonderful graphic designs, interpreters for facilitating the participation and eliminating language barriers, Carlo and Laura from Mate Agency for taking care of the streaming, TechSoup Italy for the technical support. Well, what must I say about the FEBA team? They have been in the back office, but such a fantastic support and a fantastic work done in silence and with such efficient manner that I can only tell them a big thank you to the FEBA team. A special thank also to our colleagues and friends from Feeding America and the Global Food Banking Network. Thank you to all the participants that have lived and shared this FEBA Annual Convention 2021 with us. Last but not least, I would like to thank all our members for their daily commitment. Thanks to your small gestures, you make the miracle of circular economy and social inclusion a reality every day. In 2020, the European Food Banks Federation worked in collaboration with 24 full members and 5 associate members in European countries. FEBA full members brought together 335 food banks, which were committed to prevent food waste and reduce food insecurity. They redistributed 860,000 tons of food to 12.8 million most deprived people through 48,126 charitable organizations, thanks to the professionalism and the dedication of 37,016 co-workers, 85% of them being volunteers. In addition to surplus food from food business operators, FEBA members also redistributed food from the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived, the FEAD as it is known, and also from national programs. The EU Fruit and Vegetable Withdrawal Scheme, as well as from individual and corporate donations through food collections. In 2020, our members redistributed 12% more food than in 2019 to 34.7% more people than in 2019. The dialogue will continue, and we are looking now forward to feeding the United Nations Food System Summit with our contribution and hopefully with the contribution of all food bank networks. I thank you once more to all participants for their time, for taking part to this event. And I am now declaring the 2021 Annual Convention closed. Thank you very much.